Well, hey everyone, welcome back to the Cobwebs YouTube channel where we are dusting off classic cinema. My name is Daniel, and today we're going to be talking about westerns, specifically two dark westerns from the 1950s. That is The Gunfighter, starring Gregory Peck, and Jubal, starring Glenn Ford. Two very dark and gritty 1950s westerns starring big Hollywood movie stars, both on Criterion Blu-ray. I'm here to review both the movies for you and tell you a little bit about the supplements. First of all, I just have to address the obvious. I'm not wearing a cowboy hat, and I'm sorry to anyone who's disappointed by that. Look, okay, I don't own a cowboy hat. I would not pull it off. I would look like one of those like political commentating podcasters that's like trying to look tough, and I just don't want to be that guy. Plus, unless you wear a cowboy hat like for entertainment purposes, rodeo work, something like that, or you actually work with cattle, like you actually herd cows, you don't need to be wearing a cowboy hat. You don't need to be wearing that. This is a different time, no matter how much you like Westerns. But I love Westerns. Westerns are so awesome. My gateway into Westerns was really spaghetti Westerns. Like, I didn't really grow up with Westerns, hardly at all. But I got into like the dark and gritty, violent, bad guys versus badder guys, Italian Westerns of the 60s and 70s, talking about stuff like Sergio Leone, Sergio Corbucci, Django, Once Upon a Time in the West, that kind of stuff. I got really into that, and it seems like that's pretty common for a lot of cinephiles because Westerns, like Hollywood Westerns from the 40s, from the 50s, they get a bad rap. I always hear this term thrown around, white hat, black hat. People do not like this idea of simplistic morality of like the sheriff versus the criminal. It's too simple. It's too boring. It's too squeaky clean. Too Roy Rogers in sequin shirts, right? That's what Bruce Willis says in Die Hard. That's just not the case, all right? There are Westerns that I refer to as howdy ma'am Westerns. They're super squeaky clean, super safe, and I call them that because, the hero is very boring and it's just like, howdy ma'am. I like some of those movies, but that's not quite my jam. Westerns of the 1950s are very dark, very gritty, and they're just super awesome movies. So let's start out by talking about The Gunfighter. This is a movie I brought up briefly in my very first video as part of a Criterion haul, and I hadn't watched it at that point, but I have seen it now. So in The Gunfighter, Gregory Peck plays Jimmy Ringo. He is the fastest gun in the West, right? It's a classic archetype. He is the guy who anytime someone tries to kill him, they can't because he can pull his, he's got a faster draw. He can pull his gun out, shoot them faster than they can, even if they've already got their gun out on him. Classic archetype, but this is a dark, brooding movie about a guy who's miserable, really, and a guy who hates his life. And Gregory Peck is a guy, his character really shows you what a terrible life it is to be the fastest gun in the West because, okay, his first problem is anytime he goes into a town, there's always some young hotshot. I think he always calls it like some young squirt who decides he's going to make a big name for himself. He's going to be a big tough guy and he's going to gun down Jimmy Ringo. And they never do because he truly is the fastest gun. And then he has to kill somebody. It's some dumb young punk. And he doesn't want to kill them. He has no interest in killing them, but they force him because they're going to kill him first. Because killing Jimmy Ringo means you're a big tough guy. It's like punching out the school bully, except more death. And so he hates that. He has to move from town to town. No sheriff wants him in their town because he causes trouble just because of these young punks. It's not even his fault. And he has nothing of his own. He comes into this town in order to reconnect with his wife and his kid who he hasn't seen since he was a baby because he ran out on them. So right there is like a more modern thing, something you wouldn't expect to see in Westerns, right? Dads that ran out on their families and want to try to reconnect. It's a pretty universal concept. And there is a sheriff in that town who is an old buddy of his, so he's allowed to stay there for a little while, but he causes a lot of commotion in the town. Anyway, that's probably enough plot synopsis. This is a fantastic movie, all right? It's a black and white Western. And, as much as I love black and white movies, I love a big widescreen color, Technicolor Western from the 1950s. But that's not what this is. And it honestly looks more like a noir. This is a Western noir, I would say, because it's about the human condition. It's about how miserable Gregory Peck is, even though he looks awesome in a mustache. And it's so interesting, all right? Like, it does have some shootouts. It does have some action, undoubtedly. It doesn't jilt you in terms of the kind of stuff that you want out of a classic Western, but it's just so much more thoughtful, all right? It's so deconstructionalist. Something that the Western genre, classic Westerns, do not get enough credit for is what scathing critiques they are of toxic masculinity. I mean, Westerns are talking about toxic masculinity before anybody on Twitter is, or whatever else. And the Gunfighter is absolutely one of those. What does it mean to be a man? Just how terrible it is to define manhood by toughness and by violence and anything like that. It's so... Have I talked about enough about how interesting this movie is? Like, you should watch The Gunfighter. It's really, really good. As far as supplemental material, there is a long interview with filmmaker, writer, and archivist Jenny Telleroli, I want to say, all about the director, Henry King. And it's very good. It's very interesting. Henry King seemed like a very interesting guy. This film critic this filmmaker, writer, and archivist, rather, I should say. She's very interesting, and she is on camera for part of it, even though it was filmed in 2020. So I'm sure it was nicely social distance and everything like that. But that's a very interesting thing. There is also a video essay about editor Barbara McLean by film historian and author J.E. Smythe. Interesting material there. It's not a very engaging video essay for me. I don't think there's not much personality by the person who put it together. I didn't find, and maybe you don't care about that. Maybe you just want the information. The information is good. This editor, Barbara McLean, very interesting person, very important woman in classic film history. Absolutely. I thought the video essay itself could have been a little more engaging, like I thought the interview about Henry King was, but still, pretty good stuff. There are also audio excerpts of interviews with King and McLean from 1970 and 1971. So very good Criterion Blu-ray, I would say. I had actually been interested in seeing this movie for a long time. I think I originally heard about it on the Pure Cinema podcast. And I was so happy when I heard Criterion put it out on Blu-ray, and I picked it up for a really great deal recently. So that's The Gunfighter. Super good movie. Next up, let's talk about Jubal, directed by Delmar Daves. So I'm a big fan of Delmar Daves. He is a filmmaker who made some other classic Westerns I'm a big fan of, like the original 3:10 to Yuma. If you like the James Mangold remake of 3:10 to Yuma, like I know a lot of people do, give that original a chance. Like, it's so much the same movie, but you get Glenn Ford's performance, and Glenn Ford is awesome in 3:10 to Yuma. He also made Broken Arrow, which is a pretty great Jimmy Stewart Western. He made Dark Passage. Oh, one second. Okay, Dark Passage is a noir starring Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. Awesome noir. So interesting. Like the first act of this movie is all point of view, from Humphrey Bogart's point of view. 1940s? Yeah, just making sure. 1947. 1940s, they're doing point of view camera work. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Dark Passage is an awesome movie. So definitely a Delmar Daves fan. And this movie is one of his best, I gotta say. A fantastic Western from 1956, starring Glenn Ford. I am a big Glenn Ford fan, and I didn't think I would be. So I originally had in my head that Glenn Ford is the sort of boring, morally too straight-laced kind of old-fashioned actor. And I think that was in my head because he's Pa Kent in Superman the movie. Does a great job in that movie, but come on. Paul Kent is the symbol of wholesomeness, kind of in American pop culture. He was also name dropped a few times in the Andy Griffith Show, which I grew up on. And the Andy Griffith Show for me is what I associate with boring, old-fashioned, morally boring, I guess I'd say. I'm not hating on the Andy Griffith Show, like no hate if you dig it and everything, but I don't have fond memories of the Andy Griffith Show. So associating Glenn Ford with that show didn't do him any favors for me. But watching Glenn Ford movies, God, no, he is not that guy. He is not that guy at all. He is so dark. He is such a morally ambiguous, well, not morally ambiguous, okay? Because most of his characters tend to be righteous guys, like in this and The Man from the Alamo, which is an awesome Bud Bedecker Western. They are upstanding, noble guys, but they're the kind of guys that you wouldn't think are noble. Like, they clearly have very dark pasts. They're clearly very damaged, very hurt people. And then if you watch him in a noir like Gilda, which is one of my favorite noirs, you got to watch Gilda if you haven't. He's frightening. He is a scary, damaged, effed up guy. So yeah, Glenn Ford is a very, very interesting actor. I'm a big fan of him. Ernest Borgnine is also in this movie, which is interesting. But let's get into the plot of the movie. So basically, it's not a typical Western. It's not about sheriffs versus criminals. It's about cow herding, being a cattleman in the Old West. It's a traditional, like, what a cowboy is. It's about true blue cowboys. Glenn Ford is a down on his luck guy who's basically running away from his past, very standard for Glenn Ford. And he runs into Ernest Borgnine, who has a cattle ranch and is the boss of a whole bunch of guys who herd cows for him. And he takes a chance on Glenn Ford because he's clearly a guy very down on his luck, gives him a job. Glenn Ford works very, very hard. He rises up the ranks in that organization pretty quickly and becomes pretty close with Ernest Borgnine. But Ernest Borgnine's wife, right here, is a stunning, beautiful woman, and she is very much into Glenn Ford and not into her husband. So that creates a lot of problems for Glenn Ford. She's very much a standard femme fatale. I said The Gunfighter was like a film noir western. This one I would not call it noir-like exactly, but this woman is a femme fatale. She's played by Valerie French. It says introducing in the credits, so I think this was her first movie, but she's really great in it. So there's a lot of relationship drama in this movie, and that's where a lot of it comes from. But the back of the Blu-ray actually calls it Shakespearean, and I think that's a good word to use. It's a lot about jealousy and betrayal. And there's this guy named Pinky in it who hates Glenn Ford from the start because he's jealous. And he is just one of the most horrifying Western villains I've seen. Like, he's not a charismatic villain. Not at all. He's not a guy that draws you in. Like, he's like a realistic villain, and that he's gross. He's the kind of guy you want nothing to do with. There are certain real life villains. I'm not going to say names, but I think you can think of them who, like, they're villains and maybe they gain power, but they're just so disgusting and so off-putting. And I even have to give a trigger warning about some sexual assault stuff involving that guy. He's just horrible on every level. He's the kind of guy you just want to get it so bad from Glenn Ford. This is just such an interesting movie. These are both such interesting Westerns, very morally complex. And I think they're both such great movies. Jubal is such a odd Criterion release, though. It does not have any special features. I've never heard of a Criterion disc not having special features. Bizarre. The only feature you get is this booklet of essays, or maybe just one essay. I haven't read it yet because I didn't want it to influence my commentary too much. But I'll just show you a few pages of that. You got some great pictures in there as well. And I love a good essay booklet. Like, I really, really do. I probably don't read them as much as I should, but every time I do, especially from Indicator, they're just really, really interesting. So I am happy to have that, but it is weird not to have actual special features. But this is a fantastic Western, both of these movies. This one I bought without knowing much about it. I was just in a phase where I was just, picking up Criterions, as many as I could for good deals, because I got to get a good deal on Criterion. Like, I would very rarely pay that $27.99 or whatever they normally charge. But this was selling pretty cheap on Amazon. So check it out. See if you can still get that, because it's a beautiful cover. It's a very cool side art, too. Look at that. Oh, and let's show you the disc as well. Great looking disc in there. So yeah, two dark 1950s Westerns that I'm a huge fan of, The Gunfighter and Jubal. And I just thought while we're here, I might just show you my other Westerns that I have on Criterion, which is just a couple more. And that's partly because, like I've said, I'm not a big Criterion collector, but also there's not a ton of Westerns on Criterion. They're not like Kino Lorber. So I do have My Darling Clementine by John Ford, which is a movie I've seen before and liked, but liked with some issues, but it's such a historically important Western that I wanted to give it another chance, and I wanted to own it. So I picked that up. As much as I like Henry Fonda, he feels like a weird choice for Wyatt Earp, because this is the classic Wyatt Earp story of the gunfight at the OK Corral. And I don't know, he felt like an odd choice for me. So I want to give the movie another chance and see what I think on a second viewing. And then I do have Stagecoach, which I talked about in my 5 classic films on HBO Max you should watch after you watch Justice League. If you want to find out why I would suggest a double feature of Justice League and Stagecoach, check that video out, link in the description below. But Stagecoach is one of my all-time favorite Westerns, maybe my favorite John Ford movie. Like, I kid you not, I think it's so awesome, it's so fun. So yeah, Westerns on Criterion Blu-ray. Very excited to talk about more Westerns on this channel because I absolutely love Westerns and I think not enough people talk about them. So if you enjoyed hearing about Westerns, please leave a comment down below. I love reading the comments. It's been really nice. I've been doing a podcast for a long time, and unless people email you or hit you up on Twitter, you don't get a ton of direct feedback. It's nice getting comments on YouTube. So hit me up. Let me know what are some of your favorite Westerns on Criterion. Let me know what you think of The Gunfighter and Jubal if you have seen them. And like and subscribe. I would always really appreciate that. Thanks a lot, folks. We'll talk about more old movies next time.